Welcome, Chad. Thank you so much for taking this time to have a conversation about yourself.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. And welcome to the Composers Conference. I was wondering if you could start by telling us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, where you are right now, and how you got started in music.
So, currently, I'm sitting in Cincinnati, Ohio, visiting my family. But for the past 4 years, I've been studying double bass at Rice University's Shepherd School of Music. Um, that's been a really wonderful experience. I got involved in music early on at the age of 3, studying piano, and took classical piano lessons up until about the age of 15. And then I was inspired by my cousin who also played double bass, and I needed to pick an instrument for orchestra, and that just kind of resonated the most with me. So I picked up the bass, and it kind of took off from there. And then in high school, I got pretty serious about it, and I knew that the Shepherd School of Music had one of the best bass programs in the country, and I said, that sounds like the place for me. So decided to make that happen. And now I'm finished and looking forward.
Now, you do jazz and classical and new music. So you all these different types of music. Could you talk a little bit about like your experience in each of these different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been really interesting overall. High school slash, well, yeah, early high school, very focused on classical music. I had a wonderful teacher in Cincinnati. His name is Maurice Todd, who kind of showed me the world about bass, and I owe everything to him for that. But, I dabbled in jazz a little bit in high school. I went to a performing arts high school in Cincinnati, Ohio, called the School for the Creative and Performing Arts. And they've got a great orchestra program. They've also got a great jazz program, and they bring in, thankfully, they're paired with the Cincinnati Symphony. So they're always bringing in artists, whether it's Hilary Hahn, Branford Marsalis, Benny Golson, Chick Corea. They've literally brought in all those people to school.
Wow.
Um, so I was exposed to a lot, but my focus was still primarily classical. Um, so then I got to college, and somebody in Cincinnati told me that I need to go check out a jazz jam session in Houston. And my freshman year, I started going to this jazz jam session that's been going on for 65 plus years in Houston at Cafe 4212. And I just kind of started to get steeped in that world. And then basically, I learned the jazz portion through the experience of playing throughout town. And thank God those people were so nice to me and allowed me to do that. And then at Shepherd, regarding contemporary music or like new music in general, I played some really cool stuff there. And then my sophomore year, I auditioned for the Composers Conference the first time I went, and when I actually got to go, and I had an amazing time with Fred and everybody else that was there, and I played some extremely cool pieces, and I just want to continue that. So if I can continue to do all three of those things, that would be the ultimate goal for me.
Do you see them as sort of separate, or do they sort of flow easily into one another? I watched a couple of performances of you performing, and I've seen you do different things side by side, and it seems pretty effortless. I was just wondering if you could talk about how these different ways of making music and the types of music that you're making, um, sort of the relationship between or among them all.
Yeah, in all honesty, I would say the jazz is for me, pretty separate from the classical and the contemporary. I think when there has to be so much refinement with literally my technique and the bow and extended technique on the bass, that deserves its own portion of thought when I come at it. The good thing about all that is it really keeps me on my toes,
Hmm.
my intonation, uh, my finger dexterity, all that kind of stuff. So the beauty of that is it actually transfers over when I'm playing jazz, which I think every bass player, if they're going to play bass, start with classical. You're just going to your foundation. I mean, same with piano, same with every instrument in general. Um, and then playing more jazz and like electric bass as well. I play a lot of that.
Hmm.
Um, it just kind of opens me up and gives me a different perspective. I really love writing more jazz things because I really like to quote unquote groove. I just like a really strong beat. And I especially love pieces like new music pieces that include that. One of them specifically, Charles Warren's spin-off for violin, bass, and congas.
Yeah.
That's like my favorite. It's almost like a jazz thing once you get into it. There's a lot of walking notes. That was my favorite thing to play, as an aside.
Yeah.
But and for example, last summer I ended up going to South Korea to play electric bass for 3 months, and I wasn't able to touch an upright bass, and so that was frightening for me.
Is there anything in particular about making music or being a musician that sort of drives you or is sort of important to you?
Yeah, I was thinking about this one specifically. I think for me, I'm able to relate music to a lot of other mediums of art, whether it's cooking, whether it's poetry, whether it's painting. Cooking and painting are two of my favorite artistic hobbies
Hmm.
besides music. And I feel like when you are, let's say, like playing jazz, for example, and soloing and improvising, it's so similar to improvising in the kitchen or just going completely free flow with your painting and letting your subconscious do all the work. And so whatever artistic endeavor can get me into that sort of space where I'm just creating and I'm going with the flow, that's really where I want to be. And I think once you see the relationship in all these things, then you're like, oh my gosh, everything is art regardless. And music just happens to be one of those things. But for me, I think music is my one. It's the thing I'm best at. I can't say that I'm like some amazing painter, but it's cathartic. And
It sounds like you do it pretty regularly.
I would say I do. I would say I'm painting like pretty regularly, or writing, or even journaling. I th-
Hmm.
if you can just, I think it even makes you more positive when you're doing these other things, and you're able to be like, you know what, even if this isn't maybe practicing my instrument,
Hmm.
this is going to benefit me in some way. It's going to benefit my mind.
Certainly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, what about outside of music? Is there anything in particular outside of music that is really important to you that may or may not connect with your creative life as a musician or as a painter?
Sure. Yeah. There are a lot of things, but I would say maybe a primary thing, especially during my time at Rice,
Mhm.
was my connection to veganism and kind of an outreach in that sense. Um, I started getting really into animal rights and kind of spirituality
Mhm.
in the early parts of college. And me and one of my friends from the Shepherd School of Music who plays cello started a vegan club by happenstance. And throughout the past 4 years, I've just been reading a lot, thinking a lot, even just working on my health in general, trying to be healthy. Veganism was kind of a key thing for me. And we put on some veg fests at Rice, the first ones ever. which attracted like thousands of people. And then, even again, relating it to our health and then going further to relate that to making music and, our bodies and taking care of our bodies and, like music orthopedics in some sense. So I find that it's all kind of related, but veganism, reading, even just learning, I would say learning is my passion outside. But just happen to concentrate in veganism.
As we wrap up, I was wondering, as a young person who has this, you know, future ahead of you, and if you might want to just sort of talk a little bit about what is really, perhaps really important to you in today's world, or something that's has vital interest.
Yeah, it's uh, it's definitely the weirdest time ever. I think for most people, even like a young person with not much life experience. So I think there are two things that are really important to me. One is just truth in general. I think that's more important than ever right now. And then second, piggybacking that is just freedom of expression. I think specifically for music, that's music and art in general are two things or is a thing that we can't go without. I've seen it in this time period during the quarantine, the lockdown, when we go out in the park and just play tunes for people. They love it. They tell us how therapeutic it is. It's like everything's back to normal. So I've realized that that's an extremely important part of the human experience. And we need to allow everybody to express themselves how they do that best. And I think with that, we create a healthy society. And, with truth, we strive to do unto others as we would want done to ourselves. And if we can remember that, I think everything will go okay.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to do the work where the work is required as well.
Yeah, it doesn't just happen
It doesn't just happen.
by itself. That is true.
Yeah.
Right? Things you have to have intention. Yeah.
And we have to make sure that we educate ourselves because some people don't want us to be educated.
Well, here's to education.
Yes.
Times for sure. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for taking this time to talk. This was great. I really appreciate it. And looking forward to hearing you perform the new work at the end of the conference.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kurt. And thanks for letting me be a part of this awesome conference.
Our pleasure.